This is a special two-part edition of the Chris Sands Insights and Strategy podcast featuring Pete Newcomb from U.S. Dental Transitions. You're about to see part one of this episode. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Chris Sands Insights and Strategy podcast, your go-to source for real-world practical knowledge and advice that you can apply to your personal life, maybe to your business, and your finances. I'm your host, Chris Sands, and in every episode, you can expect to come away with at least 2 insights and at least 1 strategy that you can apply or implement in your life to create a positive impact. In today's episode, we're honored to have Pete Newcomb from U.S. Dental Transitions, a nationwide dental practice brokerage founded in 1998 by Dr. Bill Adams after his 25-year career in dentistry that has now consulted over 6,000 dentists. As CEO of U.S. Dental Transitions, Pete is responsible for the overall success and direction of the company. He joined the company in 2003 after working in sales for Lanier, Siemens, and AT&T, which allows him to have a broader business vision for U.S. Dental Transitions. Pete has been involved with more than 600 successful transitions and has consulted with thousands of dentists. He is a graduate of the University of Rhode Island, where he earned a Bachelor's of Psychology degree. He is also a graduate in the Institute of Business Appraisers and member of the Practice Valuation Study Group. I've personally known Pete since 2009 and have relied on him as a mentor early on in learning the dental business landscape. I'm so fortunate to have him here locally down the street from our office at Profi 2020 Dental CPAs, and I hope this is the first of many podcast conversations we get to explore. So Pete, welcome to the show. How have you been, man?
Chris, thanks for having me. I feel like we've grown up in this industry.
Well, I feel like I've grown up. You were like a father figure in a way.
Well, I don't know about that. Well, I might have been a few years ahead of you, but nonetheless, we've both had some great lessons to teach each other.
And for those of you who are listening and can't see on video, I asked Pete to come here dressed in a special way today because a few years ago, I thought he was going viral when he posted his outfit at the Hinman Dental Conference, dressed to the nines, like the most interesting man in the world. I thought it was brilliant marketing. We like to call it the most interesting transitions advisor in the world.
It's been fun. It's been fun. Sometimes transitions can be a little dry, so adding a little flavor here and there.
Well, I think you are going to bring some flavor today. We were talking before we went on air. Pete, let's go back from the beginning. Tell me how you got into this, and then tell me like how much you have seen things change. And there's a whole lot to unpack here. I mean, we said we got to hit the record button because we were going on and on and on. Everything from just how, dentistry has changed, how the landscape of young dentists coming out of school are different, their debt load and all of that, but seller's market has changed, DSO, so much to unpack here. So if you don't mind, 1998 is when the company started, correct? And then you joined, 2003. So over 20 years now. 20 years, I want to hear what has changed.
I'm going to go back as far as I can go. So Bill and I were riding in a car one day. He had an old Lincoln Town car. We were on the way to go on a beach vacation. I was married to his daughter. And he said, "What are you going to do with the rest of your career?" I said, I don't really know. What do you got in mind? He said, "You got to look at what I'm doing." And I said, "I don't even understand what you're talking about. You sell dental practices. What does that even mean?" And he said, "Well, dentists have value. They have value in their practices. They have a patient, list. They have goodwill. Patients come back for hygiene year over year. It's a revenue stream, and they can sell that revenue stream. It has value. It's marketable." So we agreed that I would shadow him for 6 months, and I did, and I was working in my full-time job, but on weekends we'd show practices. He'd teach me the dental culture, really, which was what I was lacking. I had plenty of business experience. I was working with the Home Depot, running very elaborate spreadsheets and business processes, but Bill was doing everything as a one-off. So every time he started a deal, it was a new contract, it was a new spreadsheet. It was very rudimentary. So together we made a great team. He taught me the dental culture. I brought some business experience to the table, and I joined Southeast Transitions, which later became U.S. Dental Transitions because it limited our footprint to some extent. So, there's so many topics that we could open right now. I mean, in the days in the beginning, Bill would run a valuation on a one-page piece of paper with a pencil, and he would add the different expense items from a tax return. And I remember one night I was sitting in his living room, and he came in and he did a valuation in 10 minutes, and I said, I don't even understand how that could make a valuation. And he said, it doesn't matter. The answer is 65% of revenue. And I said, well, what is the difference between a practice that is 45% profit and 35% profit? And he said, there isn't any. To the market, it's 65%. And that's where we started. And that's also where we started to have some differences of opinions.
Well, dig deeper on that. So, I was I was graduating high school in 2003 when you were getting started there. And I don't know, the internet was around and active, but it was still in its infancy, especially compared to where we're at today. How, there's the valuations and how they come up with that. How do they even market these practices for sale? It could have been, as easy as it seems today. It seems today you can be on a mailing list and you can be on, listing on websites and all kinds of places online. But there was this, I have to imagine there was this network of maybe other practice brokers, or how did they value the practices and show them to the public?
Wow, you're taking me back a long ways here, Chris. Bill had a website. It was very simple, but honestly, I don't think he remembered the password. And so we had to reset that password time and time again. But we didn't use the website that much. He had a network because Bill retired in his late 50s, and he just lost his enthusiasm for dentistry. And I don't think it was a career that he chose. I think it was a career that maybe he was encouraged to choose. And he'd lost his enthusiasm for it over the years and decided after his father passed that he would look at doing some different things. And what he found in selling his own practice was that a lot of the brokers didn't understand the differences between practices. They had some level of business acumen, and they were trying to sell practices, but they didn't understand the difference between a cosmetic practice, a non-cosmetic practice, a bread and butter practice. They just looked at a revenue stream as being the same, and that anybody who had a dental degree could step into any practice and be successful, and that's not even close to being true. So what Bill decided to do was really get to know dentists and how they would fit together, because the first person that showed up with a check wasn't necessarily the best person to buy that practice. So he started teaching me that, and he wouldn't let me out of his sight for probably the first year and a half or 2 years, and we rode together everywhere on every call, and it was a great foray for me into business, the dental business. We were a force because he had the clinical, I had the spreadsheets. We started morphing them together, and we came up with a really great business. But I'll never forget one day I said to Bill, how do people know that we have practices for sale? And I said, because you're not updating the website. He said, they have to call me. Mm-hmm. I said, well, how do people know to call you? And he said, my friends just talk to friends, and that's how we did it. And to be fair, Bill had a very strong network at that time that was able to support him financially. And he was a dentist, and he'd done really well as a dentist. But I could not. It blew me away when he said that. It was just mind-blowing that he would say, people need to call me to understand that we have practices for sale.
Yeah, I can't imagine, but it definitely, the whole time I'm sitting here as you're talking, I'm thinking the word Rolodex, and that's what it took. I mean, having that network of relationships. What, like early on, what did he expose you to in that network? How did you get to know kind of the players in the market?
Those were some of the best times in my career. We all go back to good old days, and I loved the old school mentality, the 70s and 80s. And when I say 70s and 80s, when those guys went to school. Bill was actually a graduate in 1969 from Emory. He had a tremendous network, and the guys that he exposed us to, we'd go have lunch with dentists that were in his network, and they would talk to me about dentistry and selling their practice or what their plans were. And I treasured those times. Those were great times in my career. I learned an awful lot about dentistry and about business. Um, I really treasure those. I mean, and to drop another name, Earl Douglas. Earl Douglas was a great mentor of mine, and yet a very fair competitor as well. And I will also say that I love all my competitors. Um, any of them that are in the Atlanta area or in our footprint for that matter, I feel that I have a good relationship with all of them because there's plenty of business for everybody. And I love talking to them about where they are, what they're doing, what's working for them, and we share ideas. And I think I've been told that that's not the way everybody is in this business. But anyways, I've enjoyed it. But going back to the old school guys, you just can't beat some of the cultural, values that they taught me during those times. I mean, old techniques, rubber dams, talking about stuff that just doesn't exist anymore. Hemisections. I mean, when I go in to see a new dentist now, and I talk about some of these terms, they've heard of them in school, but they've never seen it happen in real life. And I learned about that stuff years ago, and I treasure those times.
Well, I can tell you, I speak to most of your competitors, and you and I every now and then have drinks with all you competitors, and they speak very highly of you too.
But
I think both you and Bill Adams have created an incredible reputation just by the way that you treat people. Both the people that you're serving, your sellers, the buyers that you're bringing into those deals, and creating a fair transaction, and all the other players. So, I likewise. Kind of cut my teeth with Earl Douglas early on, introduced me to my longest term dental client and best friend and personal dentist. And yeah, it's sad to see them kind of fading away, going a different direction, and dentistry has gone in such a different direction since those guys are kind of sunsetting on their careers.
I'm going to take it one step further. This entire industry was founded by Alan Thornburg.
So give me that history. I am not privy to that.
So Alan Thornburg founded the Alan F. Thornburg Company, better known as AFCO.
Wow. I did know AFCO, did not know the story.
So Earl Douglas worked for Alan Thornburg. Bill Adams was very good friends with Alan Thornburg. I mean, anybody on the East Coast that was involved in brokering practices, probably at some level, it came from Alan Thornburg. I never met Alan Thornburg. Unfortunately, a few years ago, he passed away. It was always one of my goals to meet with Alan Thornburg. I knew where he bought his cars. I know he was very successful at it. His son is still running the business. And he has a daughter, actually, who runs a competitive business to mine. But everything stemmed from Alan Thornburg. And Alan Thornburg was the originator of Goodwill and dental practices.
Wow. Right
Alan
here.
Thornburg used to sell cabinetry and used to help dentists remodel their offices back in the early 70s. He rode around allegedly in an old Thunderbird with one of those big wheels on the trunk. And he was from New York, and apparently, he had to tone it down a little bit in the South, but he is the originator of the entire industry.
So I read in your bio, being a member of the Practice Valuation Study Club, and I've never been to one of those study club meetings. I've always kind of heard in the early days, I thought it was this like really quiet secret society. Did he found that? Was he big? Because somehow, if you credit him with, kind of building this whole transitions industry, how did this hit such a nationwide impact? Because now it's.
I don't know if Alan Thornburg had a hand in the Practice Valuation Study Club. I know I was invited by Earl Douglas in the very early years, probably 2004, 2005. I don't know. I went to some other business valuation classes as well and got some accreditations. Those business valuation classes, when they're not focused on dental, in my opinion, have very little value. But I think Earl and some of his peers probably started that as a basis for sharing ideas and how to value practices early on. And it was very rudimentary. I mean, it was very simple. And I'd shared with you, Chris, that, back in the early days, the answer to the valuation of a dental practice was 65%. And I had a fundamental issue with that, coming from a spreadsheet background, coming from working with large businesses. I knew that if something was more profitable than another opportunity, it had to have more value. They did not want that to be known. They would tell me it was kind of like going to work for a union, but you wanted to dig faster than the union guys. They would slow you down. They kind of slowed me down a little bit. They didn't really want me getting ahead of this and getting too over involved. And I think when corporate America got involved in dentistry, they started to measure the profitability, and that's when EBITDA crept in. And I was like, finally, we're going to get some traction on how practices are valued differently than other practices. And it also didn't take into account if you had a really nice practice with tons of curb appeal, your procedure mix was this, there were so many variations that weren't taken into account in the early days. It was just 65%. And here we are today, and I mean, there's 10 to 20 different ways to value a practice. Are any of them right? Are any of them wrong? Is there any one answer? The market ultimately determines the value of a practice. We can give you a general idea, but Bill Adams always used to tell me, it's like trying to guess how many stars there are in the universe. There's no one right answer.
It's worth what somebody will pay for it.
That's true.
I think that's fascinating. I think doctors hearing that would think it's fascinating that there was this study club all around practice valuation. Was it more than transition advisors? I understand it was probably some CPAs in the group and lenders, or how has that evolved?
I think the lenders were often the sponsors, and they would market, their rates, why they were different, why they were competitive. There were some CPAs in the group. I think most of the CPAs in that day maybe dabbled in transitions, and they weren't in their lane, and they really didn't add a lot of value. And candidly, I think the CPAs in those days should have added more value because, in my opinion, the CPA really can determine the value of your practice. And I don't know that they understood that they could have that level of impact. I mean, you're a sophisticated guy. You understand how different values or metrics in a tax return can help to value a practice. I didn't see that in those days. They were just taking the data that they were getting from the dentist, putting it into a return, and filing it. And that was it. And when I asked questions about how they got their numbers, sometimes they weren't clear themselves.
So much more to unpack there. I want to talk like we're talking to both sides of a transaction. I want to talk to the practice owner who is maybe thinking about selling. Maybe selling is imminent. Maybe they're thinking about it in the next 3, 5 years, 10 years. And let's talk to them and give a reality check on what to prepare themselves for in terms of presenting their business, in terms of financially for themselves. And then separately, let's talk to the young doctors out there who may be thinking of striking out on their own, buying their own practice, maybe doing a startup, but in particular when buying a practice, what to prepare themselves for financially so that they're ready and bankable if they have to use a lender. So let's start with the practice owners. A hot topic that's on my mind this year. My business partner Brent and I decided to get our CEPA designation, so Certified Exit Planning Advisors, and I learned what you just said. Like what we actually do as a firm of accountants is the real value is in advisory, providing some sort of guidance using hopefully clean financials to make changes in the business, to make it more profitable, to make it better. Sometimes really accounting can't grow revenue, but this is advice that's really like, hey, you need to grow revenue. All the while trying to make them bank ready, sale ready at all times. So we go through this designation, and it was kind of secondhand nature. It's like we do this every day. We understood the whole thing. But they kind of gave us our more clear mantra now, which is they talked about how exit planning is not an event. It should not be thought of as an event. And almost all business owners think of that, and they think of it's like a chaotic process of how do I figure out what my business is worth? How do I have it ready? How do I present it? But exit planning should really be a process. Exit planning is actually good business strategy in itself. No matter what phase of business you're in, if you're just thinking about buying a business or you're early in your practice and maybe that's 20 or 30 years from now that you plan to sell, who knows what will happen in that time? Always have the business ready for sale at all times. Certainly if God forbid something happened to you. And I'll tell you this, and I'm sure you've got some stories. We had 2 clients pass away this year. And now this business, no associate, the wife's wondering, what do we do? How do we prepare it for sale? Second one, younger doctor. Doctor had only been with us for less than a year as a client. The wife was the doctor. The husband was just, I think, new to working in the practice. And he's left wondering, this is our only income stream for the family. How do we, do I form a legal DSO so I can retain ownership? Do I try to sell it? We just bought it not that long ago. We're just getting started. Everything was getting going. And it, they'd been working with us, so on paper, financially, we could prove the business, but still need the doctor. I want to talk about all of this, not just financially, but maybe the importance of considering associates and all of that. But can you speak to this idea of exit planning or transition planning not being just this event that when people say, oh, I think I want to be out at this time, and they just wait until it's that date?
You said a mouthful. So I'm going to try and unpack, as you say, some of this a little bit at a time. There was a question you had asked me off camera, which is what advice would I give to my children if they were going to be in this business, if my children were going to be a dentist? And I would say running your business like it's for sale every day is the way I'd want you to run your business. I mean, surrounding yourself with counsel, CPA, attorney, having a relationship with good people that are running, would encourage you to run a clean business. Because you may think that you're smarter than everybody else out there. You may think that you're smarter than the IRS. You may build a new deck on your home, and you may put it under repairs and maintenance. You may buy your wife a new Mercedes every year, or your husband. But ultimately, these are all factors that are going to shake out in the sale of your business. And I think that there's plenty of money to be made in dentistry without trying to outflank the IRS. And having good counsel, whether it's a CPA or an attorney or what have you, I mean, first of all, you wouldn't settle for substandard clinical behavior. So why are you settling for substandard business behavior? Why are you not adhering to the same principles in your business that you're adhering to your clinical career? I mean, do great work in whatever it is that you're doing and run clean businesses. And what I find is that if you do that, you're going to be ready for sale at any given time. I as well have, unfortunately, had probably untold number of deaths, disabilities, problems that could not be overcome, loss of licensure for things that were unforeseen. And practices, for many reasons, lose value. Death and disability are probably, on the higher end of it, loss of license, etc. But, if you have a CPA who has clean books and can distribute those to people that, whether it's brokers, a dental network, etc., and you have a relationship with an attorney, a good dental attorney, I might add, because I'm not a huge fan of non-dental attorneys. And I'll tell you a specific instance where this really worked out. There was a dentist, and again, we're back to the good old days. His name was Jim Bob Williams, and Bill Adams. Jim Bob was a little older than Bill, and Bill is 81 or 82 now. So Jim Bob, was maybe 3, 4, 5 years older than him. Jim Bob used to host dentists in his office, and they'd get together and they'd have these informal study clubs where they'd teach each other different procedures. And Jim Bob loved to teach, and many dentists do love to teach. And so they'd go over there and network, and I've no doubt that they might have had a beer or two while they were doing some of these things. But they had a great time doing it. And that's when dentistry was really fun. I mean, I'm not saying dentistry is not fun now, but I don't hear those stories as often. But Jim Bob, for whatever reason, I think he might have thought that he wasn't feeling his best. And for the last year, he kept in touch with Bill really closely and made sure that we had all his updated financials. And ultimately what happened was Jim Bob came in on a Monday morning and said to his wife, "I'm not feeling good. We need to go to the hospital." And he collapsed in the parking lot as he left his practice. Well, we had recently done evaluation on his practice, and because we were in a position to share that information immediately, we sold it for more value than he was going to sell it to the associate who was working in his practice at that time. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars more. And, I'm not saying that you need to have your practice valued every year, but you need to have clean financials that are available at any given time, whether it's to, refinance a loan, you're buying a house, your kids are going to college. I don't know. There's a million reasons why you might need to leverage the finances of your business. But to all those dentists out there that are not paying attention, and I'd put dentists into multiple categories: not paying attention, not caring, which could be the same thing, or thinking they're smarter than the rest of us. I got to tell you something. It's not a good strategy. A good strategy is to run a clean business, and you got to understand what the percentages of revenue should be. And if they're out of line and you can't explain it, it's not a good look.
What happens when in that event if they're not prepared? What does a fire sale in dentistry look like? I've been told that is kind of one of those kind of one-liners that a practice value with no doctor in it goes down by 1% per day that patients can't be seen because they might be leaving the practice. So after 90 days, it's almost worthless. And then there's the laws in each state, like a spouse can only keep the practice for 6 months in most states, and I think Florida's only 90 days.
Right.
They're aggressive. So
I would say there's a lot that comes into play there. I don't think there's any one rule about 1% or whatever, but I mean, honestly, the wrong practice is worth the equipment that's in the office. Mm-hmm. If there's a death or a disability and there's no coverage. There are other opportunities where, the staff's very cohesive, they had a loyal following, it was a very well-run practice, but even that practice might be worth 50%, in an event like that. So, but having access to clean books, I mean, here's where the biggest problem occurs is that nobody knows, let's just say it's July, and the guy hasn't run any interim financials from January to July. We don't even have a tax return for the previous year because October hasn't come around, or September 15th hasn't even come around yet. The CPA hasn't even compiled a tax return. If we have to work backwards, and it takes us 60 days to work backwards, and they're not even using QuickBooks, I would say that practice value is the equipment value only.
So the cost of that cheap accountant relationship is a lot more than the fee.
If you're not doing monthly or quarterly financials, you got a hole in your boat. I don't care if it's for sale or not. If you don't know, I'll tell you what, Amazon, Walmart, all these big companies, yeah, they're huge. But they can tell you how many of these widgets they have in stock. They can tell you to the decimal what their profit margins are. And if you're a dentist and you don't know those things, you may be in harm's way at some point.
It's like there's that saying, I was talking to my kids about it this weekend, 2 pains in life, either the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. And they're a choice. And in business, it's the same thing, like running a clean business and being disciplined about that and having the financials, having the discipline to have them run on a more frequent basis. People look at the cost of it, but what's the real cost of regret when that time happens? I love that. So you have a hole in your boat.
I want to give you my analogy to that. I've run 3 marathons in my life. I've run the New York Marathon 3 times.
Wow.
and it's pay me now or it's pay me later. So you either get prepared to run 26 miles or you suffer for 26 miles and you decide which one you want to choose. One of them might last 4 to 6 hours. The other one, getting prepared, may take 20 hours. But I got to tell you something, I've done it both ways. The celebration when I was prepared at an Italian restaurant in New York City was a lot better than the time that I was not prepared. And the only analogy I'm drawing here is that if you're not prepared, in the unfortunate event that you have something that makes you sell your practice, the pain is going to be tremendous. And, a few hours a year with the right counsel could have prevented the whole thing.
Yep. Okay, so now somebody's listening and they're thinking, okay, I need to get my act together and be prepared. And let's talk to the older doctor that says, I don't know exactly when, but maybe next 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, or I want to sell it at lunch. What do they need to prepare for? How do they need to prepare their practice for sale? What do you do for folks? And you can pull from any success stories and learning lessons, but what is it that if you were given that advice now for somebody to proactively get it ready, what would you say?
I would say, first off, that behavior is tough to change. Zebras don't change their stripes usually. And a lot of dentists have, and people will tell you that dentists are not good business people. I disagree. I think dentists have a fundamental problem with spending money, but they've run a business for 30 years. How can you discount the fact that they've owned and run a business for 30 years? And they're profitable.
There's a lot of hard lessons in there. That's right.
Well, there might be, but you know what? I don't think dentists are bad business people. And people will say, "Oh, they didn't get any business school training. They didn't go to business school. They didn't do this." Well, hell, they're doing a great job. How many other businesses stay open for 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Not that many. You look at a restaurant, gas station, convenience store, whatever it is. Their failure rate's far higher than a dentist. Dentists, first of all, are very smart. They have a huge acumen, and they learn what they want to learn. That being said, sometimes I think dentists didn't get off on the right foot because, they figured out a way that they could write their car through the practice. They figured out that they had a 5,500-pound vehicle, and they could do Section 179. Is that the smartest way to do things? I personally don't think so. I own my own business. I have two 5,500-pound vehicles, and neither one of them I run through Section 179. That being said, you can take your wife to dinner. You can say you're writing off a specialist. You can put that in your clinical supplies. You can go to Costco, and you can buy toilet paper and a whole bunch of London broils and steaks and things for the house. Put it all in your clinical supplies. How much you really saving?
Amen.
How much you really saving? I mean, if you really put a spreadsheet together, how much are you saving? They're going to get you one day.
It's just You're always easier to write that business check than that personal check. This is rampant in dentistry.
I mean, have a couple different credit cards. One's for the business, one's for your personal. I just don't get it. I mean, am I guilty of it at times? I mean, I take my girlfriend out to dinner and say she's a client, but I mean, is it rampant? No, it's not rampant, So I'm just going back to the original question, which is, what would I tell a dentist? It's not the good old days anymore. And I'll tell you, these buyers are more sophisticated than they've ever been. And the reason that they're more sophisticated is because DSOs got involved, let's just say 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, and their processes have been pushed down to buyers, individual buyers. And they're looking at every penny. And they have consultants, just like you have a CPA, they have a CPA. And if you can't measure the profit in that practice, it's worth less. So to anybody who's 5 years away from selling, I would say consider cleaning up your books. Consider running a business the way it's supposed to be run. I mean, if you look at, I have several layers of business that I have. My top line business has only business expenses in it. That's it. And I'm going to tell you a really great story. There's a dentist named Robin Turner who actually later went on to be a broker for us, a transition advisor for us in South Carolina. Every year, the top line on her personal tax return said $1 million. I looked at the last 10 years of her business. That practice sold in 30 days for top value, no questions asked. She had a clean ship. So if you think you're going to have a practice that's $600, $700, $800 million in value, but you've got $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 worth of personal expenses buried in there, you're gonna have a tough time getting the real value out of that practice. Now, what did you save over all those years? I don't know. I can't quantify that for you, but I can tell you're not going to maximize the value of the sale. You're not going to.
Yeah.
So back to your original question, I would start if your CPA and your counsel or consultants are not guiding you to do clean business, you're on the wrong team.
So true. I mean, you got to think that forget the DSOs for a minute, just any buyer in the private space, I think they are more sophisticated. I think that was a profound comment. There's more access to information than there ever has been. But still, in good business transactions, the job is buy low and sell high. The buyer wants to bring the price down. The seller wants to maximize their sale. And all of the questions, the unknowns, the shady stuff, like anything that's hidden in there. Why, when somebody asks the question, why is that so high? It brings in doubt, and the job to bring the price down is create doubt.
Very true. So I'm gonna give you a theory that I have. Buyers are more sophisticated than they will lead you to believe. They have heard how to value a practice. However, they will choose counsel that uses old methodologies of valuation to bring down the value of a practice. Because let's face it, people like me, transition advisors, brokers, whatever you want to call them, they're using the latest methodologies to maximize value. But what happened years ago? Those people, everything was 65%. So I hear it all the time. A buyer will call me and say, I've looked over the practice financials, and my consultant says it's worth 65%. I said, where did he get that number from? What methodology did he use to calculate that? They have no idea. Okay. They just were told by somebody that used an old methodology. But if they used today's methodologies, it would probably be closer in value to where we're valuing a practice. So I think buyers are dumb like a fox to some extent, because they know what a practice's real value. Everybody wants to get a good deal, right? Everybody wants to get a good deal. So if one person is saying it's 100% of revenue and another person is saying it's 80% of revenue or even less, there's a deal somewhere in there. But if one person thinks it's too high and one person thinks it's too low, we're probably going to work things out. But everybody's got to give a little bit.
That's so true. So true. Okay, so clean financials. Always looking at the last 3 years of tax returns,
at least
similar to like what, and I think I was about to say similar to what a lender requires you to do when you're asking for a loan, but the lender is involved on the buyer side many times, so that's why. Right?
I'll tell you, the latest trend we're finding now is trailing 12 months. The trailing 12 months is the most important thing, the single most important thing in valuing a practice in this day and age. The trailing 12 months. I don't care what you did the year before. I don't care what you did the year before that. I want to know what you did in the last 12 months. That is absolutely the key to a practice valuation right now.
We use that in all of our calls with clients because it shows you the activity changes. The financials are reporting the activity changes in the business, and the big question is why. Knowing the why behind something, being able to explain the why of, September is the lowest month in dentistry. What did you change in your marketing? I think I'm glad to hear you say that. It just reinforces the way.
Well, the other thing is, we're talking about getting prepared for sale. And I've seen my competitors, and I'm not shaming anyone here, but they're saying, have your best year ever. So they blow it out for the year. They file their tax return, and they are super elated. Look at what we've done, what we were able to accomplish, this high level of revenue. But then I look at the last 6 months, and they've completely taken their foot off the gas, or all the work's been done, And now the trailing 12 months doesn't reflect their previous financial year, and the value is not there. So, I mean, the gamesmanship, it just doesn't work. It all sorts itself out over the long haul.
Okay, so those are some of the financial factors. What else should they prepare to show a buyer in the business? Maybe the practice management factors.
So let's assume for a second that the financials are in great order, that you've chosen someone like Chris Sands and he's running your financials, or you have another great CPA. There's many great CPAs in the dental industry. Chris is the best, obviously, but
Yeah.
you know, I love going back to the old school guys. There was a gentleman named Nick Steen who was a senior executive for ADAC, and this goes back 20 years ago. And I happened to be friends. My wife's friend's son was his son. I know it's a long way to track it, but I asked if I could meet with his dad, because anybody I could get my hands on and learn from back in those days, 20 years ago, I was interested. I would sit on my couch and Google anything to do with transitions, anything to do with dental. I was hungry. So Nick came into my office, sat down, and he shared this slide deck with us about walking through your office with the eyes of a patient. And every time I go into a practice now, I look at the blinds, I look at the decor, I look to see if they have a window between the receptionist and the patient. I look to see if the carpet is clean, is it shag? I look to see what the operatories look like. How old are the chairs? How old are the delivery systems? And I'll tell you, it's not necessarily a valuation determinant. Yeah. I mean, we perform cash flow valuations. You can have an old chair or you can have a new chair. But I got to tell you something. If you have a patient in your chair and you've just proposed a $3,500 treatment to them, and they have a 30-year-old chair, I don't know that I'm going to be able to accept. I'm going to be apprehensive about accepting treatment plans for, and this is a real story. I have an implant on number 8. I went to see a periodontist years ago. I don't remember exactly how much it was, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for, a gum graft, bone graft, an implant, an abutment, etc. And I'll never forget asking the dentist if he was going to upgrade his decor in his chair, because I felt like I was paying a lot of money, and if he was making all this money, why was his office so dated? He was very offended, but I heard years later he did upgrade his whole office, and he wound up selling it for a very good value. So I would say your decor is extremely important from a curb appeal perspective, and it may not necessarily correlate to more value. But I have an analogy that I like to use. Most of us live in a neighborhood, and my neighborhood is 30 years old. And, the kitchen, my kitchen's not original, my bathrooms are not original. But if every house on your street was for sale, but you upgraded your bathrooms and your kitchens, whose house is selling first? Now, it may not sell for a lot more money, but it sells first. So, as far as I'm concerned, time on the market is an indicator of valuation. So make sure that your practice is in good shape. Make sure that you're using technology that's up to date. Not that digital x-rays is really a factor these days, but I still do run into people that have dip tanks. I know it's crazy, or a processor. But, years ago that was a measurement. Now it's probably, how many digital sensors do you have? Do you have intraoral cameras? Do you have scanners, etc. But look at what your technology is, because young doctors, even doctors that aren't so young, are going to come into a practice and look and see what you have. Again, it's more curb appeal. And there's many factors that I'm going to talk about here, but having a cohesive story. If you go into an office and you look around and you have the opportunity to meet a seller, and the seller does not have a cohesive story, something is broken. They either need to say, I'm moving to Colorado because I don't want to be here anymore. I'm getting a divorce and I'm doing this. I'm retiring. Whatever it is. If you get a vague story, there's trouble brewing. I don't like vague stories. You need to know exactly where you're going or where they're going and what they're doing. If you don't get a cohesive story from the seller, I would be concerned.
Yeah, what's lurking underneath the water?
Well, you don't know what his motives are, or hers for that matter. Forgive me for using him and her. The other thing is staff. How long has the staff been there? Why have they been there that long? It's not necessarily great to have staff that's been there 30 years, and all of them have been there 30 years, because my suspicion is that several of them are going to exit when the doctor retires or when he moves on or wherever he's going to. I don't like that. I like a mix of young and older staff members. I mean, yes, it's good to know that there are people that have been there for a long time because the doctor is obviously taking care of them. But if everybody's older, you are in trouble from go because they are using old methodologies. They're probably not that trainable. They're not going to be that flexible. So I think a good mix of staff is important.
How much do they trust a younger doctor, and how much will a younger doctor trust them?
I mean, how much you got to be careful that they don't undermine you when you buy the practice.
Yeah.
Practice software, practice technology. I mean, I've got doctors that are using software that's Dentamax, things I don't. There's probably 100 different practice software programs out there.
How big of a problem are paper charts?
I love paper charts as a backup. I'm old school, though. Remember who I grew up with. I'm with the Emory guy in 69. I mean, but those charts need to be scanned. If you're not scanning your charts and you don't have access to the full chart electronically, that's a problem. If you want to have charts on the wall or you want to have charts in a box, that's great. But in today's world, you have to have everything. What if you're home? What if a patient calls and says they're having a problem with their tooth? Can you access their chart remotely? You can't. So are you going to drive to the office and pull the paper chart off the wall to look and see what your notes were from the last visit? That's unacceptable. And today's, this is the way the world's going.
Yeah, I think they would think less of you as a doctor, a business owner. I mean, it's an emergency or they need access to it. So I love what we're talking about because it goes back again to exit planning is not an event. All of these things that you're suggesting when you're ready to sell your practice, what would be the reason to delay doing them now? There should be no reason. Exit planning is just simply good business strategy. And, all of the equipment, the look of that office, maybe you were cheap and trying to save money and not do those things while you own the business, but that somebody else is going to have to pick up that cost. So while I agree with you, it's not a determining factor in the value because the value is based on the cash flow, but it can be a deterrent from that buyer wanting to go through that work and that expense to buy that practice.
In my opinion, every day, every year, every decade, you should be sharpening your sword. If you're not doing one project a year to your practice, whether it's buying a new piece of technology, replacing the carpet that's 30 years old, replacing a chair and a delivery system, you have to be continuously improving. If you're not, your practice valuation is going down because you have not kept up with the times. In clinical mix, procedural mix is also a large portion of this as well. And it can go the other way as well. I have a dentist right now that's for sale that places 1,000 implants a year. Well, that's not necessarily the problem. If a practice does that collectively, that's one thing. Unfortunately, this is one of 5 providers, and he represents more than 50% of the revenue. Mm-hmm. Are you going to be able to replace him? Are we going to be able to find a doctor who can do that? So if I was going to consult with this doctor 5 years ago, I would have said, can you train the other doctors in your organization to do this as well? Because the risk is less. Because if I'm representing a buyer who's buying a practice where there's 1,000 implants placed by one doctor a year, you have a significant amount of risk, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you're not the only one with that opinion. I think in this world of DSOs and non-dental companies owning dental practices, one thing that we all learn in business school is key person risk. That's becoming a more used term now in a lot of these transactions. Dentistry has a huge key person risk problem. I always say that the worst number in business is one of anything, or if that you have multiple providers, but they're doing the bulk of that production, that's a lot of key person risk on one doctor. If that's the seller, that's hard to be able to transfer that value to somebody new.
I would say that 70% of group purchases are looking for more than one provider in an office. So if you're a single provider and your office is doing more than $1.5 million, that's a devaluation right there. They look at that as a high risk situation. You have to distribute risk amongst your providers. Furthermore, let's talk about hygiene just for a second. When you are measuring EBITDA, one of the things that you have to look at is what is the compensation for a doctor? Because as everyone knows, or if everyone doesn't know, EBITDA is the amount of money after all expenses are paid, including doctor wages. Well, if the doctor produces 90% of the revenue in that practice, his wage is going to be substantially higher than if he produces 70% of the revenue in that practice. So if you're not grooming your hygiene program to be stronger, better, faster, you're doing yourself a disservice because your valuation is going to be low.
And a lot of times that owning doctor is either not paying themselves a commensurate wage for the work that they're doing. And look, in our business of tax and accounting, especially, I'd say the vast majority of single owner private practices are filing as S corporations. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of that S corp is to limit their salary, their wage, so that they don't overpay in Medicare tax. Okay, all within the rules. And however, they have to, I coach them, they have to at least extract the same amount of dollars that they would have to pay an associate. So if you have to pay an associate 30 or 35%, they've got to show that and pull that out of the business, or at least force it and set it aside. And I've had doctors who come to us and they're in cash flow trouble, and we talk about how did you get there, and the wife or the spouse in most cases is sitting there, and they'll kind of point to the doctor and say, "Oh, he didn't take a check last month." And I'll look at them, I'll look over at the doctor, and I'll say, "Well, did you quit? Because if you were working for somebody else and they didn't pay you, you'd quit. You're not being difficult enough on your own business. You're not charging the business the fair and reasonable cost of a dentist, and you're cheating your business. You're lying to yourself. Your profit's not real. You have a revenue problem. You have some kind of problem in your business that you're not addressing, and nobody's going to buy that problem." Right? And then you have the other side of it where they think they have this huge profit, huge EBITDA, but when you have to go back and normalize what their wage would be, they don't understand that. They're like, you have to now take yourself out of the owner's seat, pretend that you're just an employee there. What would you expect to be paid on your production?
I could write a book on this. EBITDA is something that was not very well understood years ago. There's an oral surgeon that is not far from us who sold his practice, and I sat in several meetings with his CPA, and I taught him how to value his practice, how to measure EBITDA, and he couldn't get past the fact that the doctor's wage came before EBITDA. So what he kept trying to do is add the doctor's wage to the profit of the practice, and he couldn't understand why he only needed a 3 multiple to get to the value that they wanted to. And I said, well, you have to extract the doctor's wage first. Inversely, right now, I have a female dentist who's in Georgia. She pays herself $85,000 a year. She shows $1 million in profit.
Of unreal profit, yeah.
Of unreal profit. And you're exactly right, Chris, what you said about corporate America, DSOs, however you want to classify it. They look at normalizing wages, and they also want to look at FICA, Social Security. So everybody wants to say, okay, so the doctor's doing $1 million worth of work. Let's just say it's 30%. Well, you can't just put 30% on that because it's probably going to be more like 33 or 34% by the time we get done with FICA, Social Security, Medicare. Forgive me, this is your your area. I'm not the expert in this.
So far, you're on point.
Well, 20 years has helped me get here. You just need to run it like it's for sale all the time. Just like you said, doctor doesn't take a check. Why didn't he take a check? What's the problem? Are they having a cash flow crisis? Why was there a blip in the revenue? Did they take a vacation? How many days do they have in savings for these cushions? Okay? Because, I mean, far too often, and COVID taught us a lot, I think, but some people never learned, and some people still haven't learned.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Profit Maximizers at Crown Card Services. Experience the royal treatment for dentistry's credit card processing needs with Crown Card Services.